Discretion advised.
'Tis true my form is something odd, but blaming me is blaming God. In April 1890, the remains of Joseph Carey Merrick were laid to rest in an unmarked grave in the East End of London. Merrick was no obscure pauper. He had become one of the most celebrated figures of Victorian society, the Elelphant Man.
I was born in Lee Street, Leicester, on the 5th of August 1860. I went to school like other children until I was about 11 or 12 years of age, when the greatest misfortune of my life occurred, namely the death of my mother.
Joseph Merrick's mother died when he was 10, and his father remarried. The woman he remarried was not very compassionate to Joseph.
Together with my deformity, she was the means of making my life a perfect misery. I was taunted and sneered at, so that I would not go home to my meals, and used to stay in the streets with a hungry belly rather than return for anything to eat.
He used to hawk festival cigars and then haberdashery around door to door.
The Monday after Christmas, 1879, Joseph arrived at the doors of the Leicester workhouse.
And there he is, Merrick Joseph. His calling is down as a hawker. His birth is given.
3 years later, aged 20, Joseph had surgery for the first time.
I then went into the infirmary in Leicester, when I had to undergo an operation on my face, having 3 or 4 ounces of flesh cut away.
Nothing could stop the disease now, and Joseph realized he could turn his deformed body into an asset.
When he left the workhouse, he went off to exhibit himself in the freak show.
He joined forces with Sam Torr, a local impresario who was in the music hall business. He asked him to promote his career as a freak, and his first engagement was at the Gaiety Theatre. It's a building which still stands in Leicester today. Joseph was a star attraction, reveling in the details of his deformity.
In making my first appearance before the public, who have treated me well, in fact, I may say I am as comfortable now as I was uncomfortable before.
The money rolled in. His career took off, and the freak show went on the road.
A travelling circus came down from Leicester. Joseph was displayed in a shop opposite the hospital.
Unwittingly, Merrick had brought himself within a stone's throw of one of the most ambitious young surgeons in Britain.
Treves got to hear from one of his students that there was a man with monstrous case of deformity on show in an empty shop. Was sufficiently interested to go and see this freak show, and met Joseph Merrick and persuaded him to come to visit him in his rooms in the London Hospital Medical College.
First known photographs of Merrick were taken. A series of 4 plates, seen here, a permanent medical record of his terrible disfigurement. Unable to come up with a diagnosis, Treves persuaded Merrick to put on a private show, this time in front of London's prestigious pathological society.
Not appropriate to show someone who was essentially, in their terms, a freak, rather than someone who was acutely ill.
It was 1884, and the tide of public decency was turning against freak shows. The police moved Joseph on. With his livelihood threatened, Joseph travelled abroad in search of a new audience. Almost made enough money to give up touring when disaster struck.
He was robbed over there, and given his medical condition and his state, to be able to get back and get passage without any money at all.
Arrived at London's Liverpool Street station, he faced the most terrifying experience of his life.
The police were called, and they found Treves's calling cards still in Joseph's pocket. So they brought him to the London hospital. Frederick Treves was called from his home and arranged for Joseph to be admitted onto Cotton Ward.
It was here that Frederick Treves first brought Joseph Merrick when he brought him to the hospital, but due to his horrendous appearance and that upsetting some of the other patients, he was then moved to a more secluded attic room.
Appealed to the chairman of the hospital, Francis Cargom, for help.
To the editor of the Times. Sir,
I am authorized to ask your powerful assistance in bringing to the notice of the public the following most exceptional case. There is now in a little room of one of our attic wards. He can but hope for quiet and privacy during a life which Mr. Treves assures me is not likely to be long. Can any of your readers suggest to me some fitting place where he can be received?
We know over £250 was sent in to the London hospital by the readers of the Times and placed in what was called the Merrick Fund. Now, that would have been a very considerable amount of money and provided sufficient monies really to look after Joseph for the rest of his life. Furthermore, a Mr. Singer offered to pay £50 to the hospital every year if they could keep Joseph here. And the committee records record that it was regarded that it was not only financially a sound thing to do, but it was the right thing to do, morally the most appropriate thing to do.
Joseph was officially discharged as a patient and given his own rooms in the hospital grounds in Bedstead Square. Joseph had found sanctuary at last.
He liked to give gifts and to receive gifts. He made models and gave them to friends and visitors.
Of the many models he made, only this one now survives. It is a remarkably delicate piece of work.
We know that Princess Alexandra visited him and that he was very, very touched by her visit.
Of all his visitors, his most faithful was his surgeon, now his friend. Treves knew, beneath the fine clothes, the man was deteriorating rapidly. His head had become so large he could barely support it, and his speech more and more difficult to understand. But even Treves didn't realize how brief his happiness would be.
To the editor of the Times. Sir, in November 1886, you were kind enough to insert in the Times a letter from me drawing attention last Friday, to the case of Joseph. Though apparently in his usual health, he quietly passed away in sleep.
Joseph had talked about during life the fact that he might well end up as a pathological specimen, and he probably appreciated that the hospital was very keen to maintain his remains as an educational medical exhibit.
Frederick Treves still had no idea what had caused Joseph's dreadful deformities, but believing that doctors in the future might be able to tell what was wrong, he left them a legacy, a series of clues. A few days after Merrick died, a porter was instructed to make casts. The results were a triumph of Victorian artistry and reproduced faithfully the details of his tormented body. The surgeon involved in the Jack the Ripper case was also at the London hospital. It was he who preserved Merrick's bones by boiling and bleaching. Merrick's twisted skeleton displayed a body tortured from the inside.
This is the Elelphant Man, Joseph Merrick. Joseph himself always knew that his skeleton would be available for scientific study.
Frederick Treves had been unable to diagnose Joseph Merrick's condition. But has his legacy led today's doctors nearer to solving the mystery of what was wrong with the Elelphant Man? The very treatment that had preserved the skeleton had turned out to be a major obstacle.
I thought that the findings in his skeleton reasonably supported the historic diagnosis of neurofibromatosis.
Frederick Treves had had the foresight to preserve skin samples at the time of Joseph's death. They would have provided all the answers, but sadly they were destroyed in the Blitz. One clue still remains from the Treves legacy. Joseph's hat and mask were being worked on.
I was interested in the construction. The hat was in poor condition and needed conserving.
On closer inspection, the veil revealed something unexpected.
I found the stains in the sense of the connection with Joseph Merrick. I thought the DNA might be extracted.
The saliva stains proved too old to provide the hoped-for DNA. But could there be an alternate source?
I feel DNA from the tooth would be a better bet. The first thing we have to do is cut a hole in the tooth, remove the hard surface of the tooth, which is the enamel, and then we go into the dentine and the pulp of the tooth, where we hope to find some remains of soft tissues that are present normally in the tooth.
When Dr. Thacker returned to his lab, he was unable to extract DNA from the sample.
Probably the most unusual x-rays that I have ever seen. His right hand shows enlargement of the right ring and little fingers, which is seen in neurofibromatosis, but it's also a very distinctive feature of the Proteus syndrome. These x-rays of the skull really do resemble a condition called fibrous dysplasia, but if you'd looked at that in combination with the rest of the skeleton, then that diagnosis would no longer fit. Looking at his legs, now if you looked at this bone on its own, it would look like Paget's disease, but again that doesn't really fit because that condition affects patients who are much older. I think if we'd been given all of these x-rays separately, then looking at each one in turn, we may have come to a different diagnosis with every single x-ray. It was the combination of features that led us to one diagnosis and against another. We felt it was the Proteus syndrome rather than neurofibromatosis.
Could I create myself anew, I would not fail in pleasing you.
If you can look back and know you were loved, you were loved by someone, touched by someone, held by someone, meant something to someone, loved somebody, touched somebody's heart along the way. You can look back and say, you were loved. You can have diamonds in your head, have all the riches in the land. Without love, do you really have a thing? When someone cares that you're alive, when someone finds the world in your eyes, then you know you found all you need. You'll hold this world's most priceless prize, the sweetest treasure in this life. If you can look back and know you were loved. I'm not a stranger to the dark. Hide away, be safe, 'cause we don't want your broken parts. I learned to be ashamed and all my scars. Run away, they say, no one will love you as you are. Oh, 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 this is me. Oh, 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 this is me. This is me. Look out, 'cause here I come. T-H-A-K-Y-O-U.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.